Welcome to Cultivating Resilience, a podcast from Cultivemos, the Network for Farmer Well-Being. I'm Hans Hageman.
And I'm K. Megan Washington. Cultivating Resilience is all about the intersection of farming and mental health. We cover everything from financial planning to community building, all with an eye towards practical advice.
We explore personal strategies for stress management and the systemic issues underlying those stresses, because all of those things contribute to mental health.
For the podcast, we have wide-reaching conversations with some incredible farmers and farm advocates, but we can't always fit the whole interview into a podcast episode. So we've created videos of our discussions so we can share even more with you.
We hope you enjoy this interview and get something from it. And if you'd like to learn more about Cultivemos or listen to the podcast, we've put some links in the description below. Until next time, stay grounded. Rev Dele, welcome. This is fun for me. I have seen your name on various listservs for Northeast farmers of color and in emails with things like the Black Farmer Fund, and it took me coming all the way to Mississippi before I get to see you actually face to face, even if it is virtually. So I'm glad you're here and welcome. Could you please introduce yourself to the audience and let them know a little bit about who you are?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And we could have crossed paths in North Carolina. I have been up and down the eastern seaboard myself doing this work with soil and souls. But I am Rev Dele. I'm grandmother, mystic, and earth keeper. And I'm responding to a spiritual call from my Micmac ancestors to lead the resilience. The work that I'm doing now came about really through a spiritual call that I received while I was in the forest. And it was very dramatic. I was driven out of the forest with a swarm of ticks. And this big booming voice said, "Teach the church how to model sustainability." Well, honey, I was not thinking about doing that. I am a minister. I'm sixth generation minister, activist minister at that. I'm very aware and comfortable with the church, and yet with my mystic leanings, I've been on the outskirts of the church as well, and I resonate more clearly with the young adults who say none, because sometimes our institutions are not serving us. So what I'm doing, I've been doing this since 2012. I have been trying to figure out why communities of color, specifically Black and Indigenous communities, why are we not taking care of ourselves? Why are we not preparing for the climate crisis that we are in right now? We have never been climate deniers, and yet we don't seem to be putting the structures in place to care for ourselves. Well, after doing field research up and down the eastern seaboard, I discovered the systemic reasons why our institutions are not able to respond. And so I developed Soil and Souls through a series of pilot projects whereby we teach young adults resilience training and indigenous land management as a healing enterprise, as well as a native and medicinal plant nursery. And so that's the work I've been doing. That's the call. That's the 25-word or less synopsis of who I am and why am I here.
Now, Rev, you talked about getting that call in the woods with the ticks. Was that the first time that Spirit, the universe, Earth had spoken to you?
Oh, absolutely not. When I was young, my father used to take us camping. And I remember my first oneness experience with the Creator when I was about 9 years old. And we were in a tent. Back in those days, the tent was actually on the ground, right? And I would put my face on the earth, and I could hear the wind rustling in the leaves of the trees. And it just felt like my consciousness was being bathed. And so that was just a very telling experience. As time went on, my parents continued to take us into nature. But when I became a teenager, they made it clear that they were going into nature as a refuge from the civil rights work that they were doing. They were frontline civil rights activists, very successful. Between the two of them, they each have a statewide and a national civil rights suit that they have won. And so that's a lot of fighting in just one family. And it did take its emotional toll on all of us. And so I remember in high school, my mother would say after a really bad week, "We're going to the mountains." And that's what we did. They had property that was adjacent to state-owned property, and they went up there very specifically to debrief and decompress from all of the racial tension that we experienced. We were blockbusters. I grew up on the front lines of desegregation, and as I watched the type of justice work that my parents were doing, I knew that I would not be able to escape ministry because it's just too ingrained in my family. But I decided to approach it from a contemplative standpoint. And so that even today, I teach that justice begins as inner balance, and then it spreads throughout our social and political and economic systems. And in that way, we have our healing embedded in our day to day existence, and we don't have to do this yo yo activity that we're doing now between working real hard and then falling out with trauma.
You talked about being, I think, a sixth generation preacher. Is that right?
Activist minister, yes.
But you also talk about some of the structures that didn't necessarily lend themselves to the work that was calling to you. As you've moved through that work, does that Christian base remain incidental, or has it played a more significant role as you've looked at it from different perspectives?
Well, if you know the beginning well, the end will not trouble you. So let me start at the beginning. As I noticed, I've had early experiences with the Creator, not only in nature, but, at nighttime callings. And so I began reading the Bible at a very early age. I read it through about 4 times. By the time I was 12, I was ready for adult Christian education, and that does not exist. And so I had questions from the text, and I have a relationship with Christ, and I was determined to find out, well, where do you live out these promises? And so the Spirit sent me lots of places to get answers to my biblical questions. And so today, as I do my nature-based work, I try to help Christians make the same leap that I have made to reintegrate nature back into our theology and practice. We know that colonialism is what disrupted the spiritual connection with nature, and so it's not natural for Christians to believe the things that we believe and to reject the things that we reject. And because Christ taught universal love and didn't use any of the words that we tend to associate with this faith, I don't have any trouble using different words to talk about universal realities. Um, the young people that I'm working with, the young adults, the 18 to 35-year-olds that we serve with Soil and Souls, they too are they're really yearning to reroot themselves spiritually. Not all of them are ready to dispense with the church. So I try to help them understand what are the reinterpretations and what are the broader understandings of the text itself. Um, so Christ didn't have any trouble with Earth Mother. It was that resurrection ray that he rode when he got up out of there. So um, I don't see the contradictions. I never have. And even my mother raised us to be very ecumenical. So my father was in the Air Force. And so, I grew up traveling. And every place we moved, my mother chose a church that was appealed to her by the Spirit. And so we were in different denominations, and I just don't have the hard and fast boundaries that many people have who, didn't have the opportunity to travel.
Now, one of the other golden threads that seem to comprise this garment of your work are your indigenous roots, Mi'kmaq, Yoruba, Cherokee. Could you speak a little bit more about how that piece also informs your work?
Absolutely. Okay, well, we grew up knowing how our ancestors came here. We grew up knowing the Yoruba man was married to a Cherokee woman. He was enslaved, but he married a Cherokee woman in Louisiana. We grew up knowing that our French ancestor married an African Micmac woman. So we grew up knowing these threads, and what is interesting is that while history was a very important survival tool, moving us through uh, segregation, we were not allowed to acknowledge our indigenous roots publicly. It was taboo. We're on the Cherokee rolls, but even in our family stories, we understand that because we were black and native, they did not want to give us that designation. What we do have roll numbers, but we had to fight for it, and so the whole Dawes rolls thing, this whole blackness issue continues to plague us. On the indigenous side as well as on the European side. It's a problem. What can I say?
How active are you in taking on that issue as one of the themes of your work?
What I have done throughout my work is my activism is to live the truth and to live the reality. One of the stints of my career was producing festivals around social justice issues, and within that context is where I lifted up my Yoruba culture. And so my culture has always been the lead for how I do my work, because people are more accepting of just a cultural expression, and you're able to share more truth within that context. And so it's really the fabric that I wrap the truth around. As I said, I produce festivals teaching the Yoruba tradition. I have studied when I raised my children on medicinal herbs, and studied within the Akan tradition to acknowledge that thread of mine. And it was while I was on family land in Virginia that my Micmac ancestors made it very clear that um, they were the ones talking to me. It was not the ones that I knew more readily. We have a lot more history about the Yoruba and Cherokee, but they said, no, this isn't them. This we're somebody else. And so I had to go back to my Micmac thread, uh, and have been able to do that. Soil and Souls is in partnership with the Métis Micmac clan out of Quebec, and the spokesperson for that clan is transmitting culture to us. The forest retreat that we produced in 2020 was the first time that the culture had been transmitted in English, and the first time it had been transmitted in the United States. And this was during the pandemic. We live streamed from Quebec into the forest in New Paltz, New York. And we continue to honor that. And again, with a pause, like most of us has paused during the pandemic, but we have started back up this year with our talking circles, so that as we get closer to being on the land, we will have a social structure that honors that culture.
And you talk about going back to the land. One of the other things you've also talked about is a crisis of land access. Could you describe what could you describe what you mean by that, who it impacts, and what the roots of it are?
The roots of it are capitalism. But I will say this, being specific to the work that we're doing. In 2021, Soil and Souls, like I said, had produced some forest retreats, and some of the participants from those retreats were in New Jersey. And when we made our solidarity visit there to visit the urban gardens, one of them had just had their urban garden stolen by the city. They had submitted a proposal to purchase the lot that they had been leasing all these years, and instead of the city responding to them to their lease proposal, they sent someone to remove all of their educational materials, about $3,000 worth of materials. Soil and Souls hosted a healing retreat to help them recoup and to strategize on how to move forward. In that process, I started being moved. It was during the pandemic, and housing was closing up, and people were being shuffled around. within 1 year, I had to move 4 times. That's too much. I had to move 4 times with my plants. I already had the inventory for the nursery. So what that meant was not only was I homeless, but I had to get my plants to a safe place. Fortunately, we have a cooperative co-owner who has a farm in North Carolina. We packed up all the plants, drove them down to North Carolina from New York, stabilized the plants. I had to stabilize myself by buying a camper. Okay, so I've been living in a camper for almost 2 years now. Wow. uh, in anticipation that when we get to the land, the camper will be a blessing because we will not have the pressure to build something immediately. I will be able to stay on the land and naturally roll out our programs. So, not having, and I want to talk about this as well. In New Paltz, we had a lease. I've had several pieces of land. We had a lease with someone who refused to let us come onto the land when it was planting time. And this was a farming lease. Now, I was able to go onto the property to do our educational work, but they said, no, you're going to disturb the other people with all that farming stuff. I'm like, wow. So it doesn't matter what kind of leases you have. It doesn't matter about your access. You must be able to control your land. I've had land where people would spray GMO, Roundup and everything on my plants. They would cut things off because they thought they were too tall. I was living on family land in Virginia, and because I was doing this quote unquote, nonsensical work, the house was sold out from under me. Okay, this is supposedly a house that was bought for me, 12 acres, for the express purpose of doing this ecological work. I came home from our Cuba delegation and my items were in storage. So I've had quite a few experiences with land access. I'm not interested in land access at all. Uh, After my crisis of moving 4 times, I partnered with the person who had their farm stolen, and I said, we need to do something different. And so we formed Indigenous Mothers Community Land Trust, and we have worked to change some of the protocols with community land trust norms because ours is a culturally based organization rather than a geographically based organization. And so we had to change our membership categories and some of the provisions in the bylaws to reflect that this is a land trust to protect Indigenous people in the diaspora. And so we come from a variety of lineages. We have quite a lot in common in terms of how we manage land, but those things need to be protected. When I first moved to New York in 2019, it was all in the papers with the Ramapo Lenape tribe. They had been donated 13 acres of land in New Jersey, and their neighbors were suing them because they put up prayer flags. We're suing them because they had statues on their own land. So, as you see, yeah, and this is 2019, okay? So, I'm not talking about ancient history. I'm talking about right now, we need uh, legal protection to do the indigenous work that we need to do. And even the scientists are admitting that indigenous land management is what will lead us to through resilience through this climate crisis. So we should be protecting this way of life rather than continuing to attack it.
When you talk about indigenous land management as a way around a lot of these issues, is there an ideal model? Do you have one in mind? Are you already implementing it? Is there one that you are modeling your model on?
There's some general terms in terms of growing perennial plants, growing native plants, growing in guilds so that you put the plant families back together. And when you do that, you automatically change the quality of the soil, you reduce your need for watering, you reduce your need for fertilizing. So it's about relearning what families go together, growing on the contours, not tilling, going back to, again, ways that our ancestors stewarded land. they often grew food without tearing it up. I poke at my Christian brothers and sisters. I says, well, when God started a garden, the first thing God did was plant a tree. So why are you guys taking the trees out? Just a little jab. I'll be nice. But anyway, those are the basic premises. In addition to that, within my Metis Micmac culture, we have a way of growing what we call avioles. It's sacred geometry. It's working with the hexagon shape. And what we discover is that all land follows these certain energy patterns. And so I have learned how to recognize these energy patterns. I've taught them to our farmer down in North Carolina, and he is growing market crops using these energy patterns that, again, help to stabilize the plant families. It reduces the implements that you need to use.
Talk to us about how spirituality is a part of that planning and the result.
We begin with the idea that all life has consciousness. And if it has consciousness, we can communicate. And if it has consciousness, then what we do impacts them, what they do impacts us.
Is a part of that planning and the result.
We begin with the idea that all life has consciousness. And if it has consciousness, we can communicate. And if it has consciousness, then what we do impacts them, what they do impacts us. And I teach how human beings are a mirror imprint of nature. And you can see that physically through our lungs looking like tree limbs, through our thumbs looking like the rings on a tree. So there are various physical manifestations of our relationship. And so when you are growing indigenously, you're just honoring who's there as if they matter, as if they are a family member. We talk about all our relations, and we learn what lesson do they have for us. It's important to remember that even scientists will say that in cities that have a good tree canopy, that there's less crime. Okay, it's cooler. It's 10 to 20 degrees cooler when you have a natural growing pattern in your city. And so it behooves us all to learn these things. So within our indigenous traditions, we remember the stories of what the various plants and what the various insects and what are their lessons, what are their social lessons, what are their lessons about human character and behavior. These are all of the things that we integrate into our growing. Our African ancestors created dances, but you were dancing in a way that your relationship to the earth allowed you to plant faster, and it allowed you to plant with precision because you knew how to move your body in relationship to the land and what you were doing. Um, I don't have a very good explanation without showing you. I didn't come prepared to teach a dance class.
That'll be next season.
There you go. No, that'll be when you're coming on our site, right? And
Right,
we'll
that's
be
right.
happy to do that.
Now, talk to me. Who comes on your site? Who is the audience for the work that you do?
Okay, well, the work that Soil and Souls has been doing since 2016 is training young adults, primarily African American, and now we're doing Black and Brown communities up here in New York, but training young adults 18 to 35 in resilience. So it's training them not only about growing patterns, but also about how to market their products, how to create a circular economy, and how to create food justice networks. Okay, so we have a specific community-based model that we use in that work, and we're finding that before people can really do the work, they have to uh, make some steps and make some progress on their own personal healing journey. And so the nature is our healer, and then when we become healthier, nature becomes our teacher. And That's the way we operate. The specific call that I received was to, again, address why aren't black and brown, why aren't we taking care of ourselves? What's wrong? And this is an answer to that. It's an answer that has an institutional component as well as the leadership for young adults, because that's the missing thread. Many young adults will tell you that they have left their lucrative jobs, they have left their high prestige jobs to go back to the land because spirit told them to do that. They are very happy to do that work. They are excellent at doing that work. And yet there is this spiritual longing. No one has taught them how to cultivate strength from the land. And so that's what our program does. It fills that gap of how do you not only grow proficiently and create markets, but how do you gather your personal strength? How do you fortify your spirit? How do you strengthen your community? What people also don't know is that many of our liberators in the past had special relationships with nature. George Washington Carver, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, all of them were mystics, and they had very special relationships with nature that enabled them to do the work that they are known for.
Now, when young people come out and you see that they're in need of the healing that you're speaking about,
Mhm.
is there a typical pattern for some young person in need of healing, but who knows that nature is where they need to be? What's the path for them? How does that happen for them to receive that healing? If they don't know what they don't know, what's the process?
Exactly. Okay. Like anything else, you start where people are and you just invite them to put their hands in the soil. And as you're working next to them, you make them aware of what's happening. They make them aware of the chemicals that they are receiving into their body as their hands are in the soil. You take them into the forest and you you invite them to breathe with the tree. Okay, touch the tree. Feel what happens when you sit against the tree for X amount of time. See what happens. Even in our stuffy permaculture classes, they will tell you go sit somewhere for 2 hours and don't move. As you sit there, your awareness will shift. You will shift into a whole nother zone. You will hear things you did not hear at the beginning. You will see things you did not see at the beginning. So nature has a way of drawing you in, and when you allow that to happen. So this is something I found this out in 2006, that nature works a lot quicker than human beings do. I produced an environmental arts camp for middle school age boys. We took about 12 boys from Washington, D.C., took them down to Southern Virginia, let them run on 80 acres for a week. And about midweek, there was an amazing transformation. What happened? They were running away from us and hiding in the middle of the day. So I had a staff, male staff, these were all boys, and we went and we said, what are they doing? And what we found out is all of these boys who didn't know each other, who were come from very wide backgrounds, they were running away to pray together in nature. They wanted to talk to their creator with each other without us. So nature has a way of communicating with us when we are open. And so the pathway to the young adults or the pathway to old adults is to help you be at ease long enough to where nature opens you up yourself. We've got a space for you.
I'm at least going to pay
I
a
know you want
visit.
to come.
I do. I do.
Well, you've got to help us raise money. The we've identified 102 acres in Middletown, New York. It's
Mm,
beautiful,
wow.
gentle rolling hills. There's a wetlands in the middle. There are 5 different pastures. It's an old dairy farm, 1800s. That everything is all dilapidated, but the land is beautiful. It's gorgeous. The deer run freely. The birds come into the wetlands, the area, and the wind again rustles in the leaves in the trees, and so it's a beautiful place to be. You can see the Shawangunk mountain ridge, from almost any hill on the property. So we again we have several organizations that have joined together. We have just started fundraising, but we've got to run real fast. We have to raise several $100,000. And so if anyone, resonates with that mission, I would just invite them to be in touch with us. Indigenous Mothers Community Land Trust. Look us up online. We have a YouTube channel. You can email me at revdele.com, and I will tell you all about it.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes. When we talk about buying that 102 acres of land, you also talked about capitalism being one of the sources of the crisis, and you also mentioned the circular economy. How much of the game of capitalism are you going to need to play to further your work? And could you explain to us a little bit more about the circular economy that you talked about?
Yes, we are going to have to play the game of capitalism. And we're going to have to raise cash because all of us that are involved are not wealthy. We don't have 9-to-5 jobs, so we can't even get a mortgage, okay? So we're going to have to rely on wealthy donors, people who want to support indigenous efforts, people who want to support conservation and putting land back into its natural system. Of course, we're going to have to follow rules and regulations about permits and so forth, but that's what's required to secure that land. Circular economy means that we first of all shift from being only consumers to being producers. Okay, and as we become producers, now we must create networks to fulfill each other's needs. So, what's planned for this land is that in addition to the healing retreats, in addition to the sacred geometry and things of that nature that we will be teaching, this will be a place where farmers from New Jersey and farmers from New York City can come to create their own markets. Okay, so not only are we sovereign on our land, we are sovereign with the food that we grow, but we are also sovereign with who we sell to and who do we buy from. So it's about making sure that the dollar stays within your community rather than going outside of the community. That's the and being aware of the full system, not only the growing, the producing, the harvesting, the value-added products. What about the distribution channels? There's a whole series of careers related to distribution, and we need to know all of those careers. Trucking companies, refrigeration companies, all of those things that are necessary to transport food.
It's an incredible model. Will you be satisfied once that model is up and running, or do you have a larger mission? Because I seem to recall reading something about resilience hubs.
What we plan to do is, again, I have this model, community-based model for organizing resilience hubs. There's one forming in North Carolina right now. Hood Seminary has agreed to be the host, and they have called in community stakeholders in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, Alamance County, and Charlotte. And the model calls for organizations to covenant, that means to promise that they will work together, to promise to lift up a barn raising ethic. And we will have young adults assigned to each institution so that you have a minimum of 10 people working together with 10 adults who are trained to work together, because the people who are actually doing this work will be the young people, the people with open minds and strong backs. Okay, so teaching them how do we create this system, and then in essence training them to become first earth responders, which means that this group of 10 adults can go into another community, they can parachute into another community, interact with the young adults there, and lift up a resilience hub, lift up a food distribution system that people have sovereignty over. We want to have, 30 different resilience hubs and train 300 leaders to do that, 10 leaders per hub. That's 300 leaders. So that's the ultimate goal. That's really the vision that we began with. And it's just taken a long time to get to this stage where we're finally, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Does politics play a role or need to play a role in any of these things that you're trying to do?
Politics plays a role in terms of the land policies. Having getting access to land sometimes is a political game. Once you get the land, having permission to do what you want to do on the land becomes a political game. Uh, in the cities, again, we have an unsustainable aesthetic, which means that our concept of beauty is not sustainable. We don't appreciate natural beauty. Therefore, we prevent natural plants from growing in people's yards. So, those are policies. I have a campaign I'm working with called Unlawnful, and it is to encourage whole communities to restore their lawns back to natural designs. And that's to save them. That's to save them water. That's to reduce the heat that's coming into their neighborhoods. That's where politics comes into play because we've put a lot of really just unsensible barriers in our own way to being resilient. Being resilient is actually easy. That's the way we were designed. That's the way the earth was designed. And so all we have to do is remove the roadblocks. These are cultural, emotional roadblocks, and nature is right there. I think the pandemic proved to us that once we gain our senses, nature responds immediately. Do you remember within 60 days that smog had moved away from mountains?
Right.
People had not seen mountains in generations. So it will not take 10 generations for these changes to happen. I have changed soil in 4 years. So it's well within a lifetime that you can change your environment to support you.
In that effort, you talked about money. And so that's one answer to the question I think that I'm going to get ready to ask you. What role do non-Indigenous or non-Black and brown people, what role is there for them in this kind of a movement?
Well, of course, as allies, that means that you're supportive. If you have money, give it. If you have political power, share it. Also, in terms of healing yourself um, from the attitudes and from the presumptions and beliefs that you have. So I think that's the role, is to agree that maybe there is another way and maybe I can support a way that actually sustains everyone. And so it's being willing to shed maybe a little bit of privilege or to share some power. But yes, there's a role because we all want to thrive together. This is not really a separatist movement. This is a movement to include Black and brown people because right now we're, sometimes invisible and very much on the bottom. Uh, it's just to allow people to have their own sovereignty over things that impact their lives. So we do have allies all along the way. We have mentors financially. We have mentors in our growing. We have mentors even as we put our housing together because there are many programs that are out there that have not been made known to us. I was blown away 2 weeks ago that in a learning session where I said, "You mean farmers get all this kind of support? They didn't tell us this." Yes, so it's sharing information and not being afraid. I think maybe that's the first step is in people who are not Black and brown is to realize that you do not have to be afraid of us. We want you to be part of the human community. We want you to be productive and kind and cooperative with all of the rest of us. And so um, just allowing your own heart to open and let that happen. Welcome. We welcome you.
In terms of extending and opening our arms, what do we need to do with regard to the education system? Is there anything that can be done? Can things happen in schools to get young people initiated before they come to you already harmed?
Oh, that would that would be lovely. A lot of farmers are doing programs in urban schools. The backlash that we're all dealing with is that all of the supplemental, what we call supplemental programs, have been taken out of the schools, the music, the arts. And so we have to allow those programs to come back in. We have to acknowledge the science that is a part of, and the art that's a part of growing food sustainably, and just allow that to be. Soil and Souls does have a program for high school students, teaching them how to grow and sell sunflower seeds as a snack food company. The problem that we ran into is that the institutions working with the teenagers were dismantled by gentrification. So we have to be able to go into institutions and share. There are plenty of people ready, willing, and able to teach according to all of the academic standards. They have to be allowed.
You're taking on a lot. What do you love most about the work that you're doing?
Oh, I love my young people because they love Mama Earth. So it's a circular love affair.
Is there any particular story of transformation that you'd be able to share?
Besides the middle school age boys who were running away from us so that they could pray in
I love
nature.
that one. I love that one. Yeah.
Um, yes, there's a story for myself.
Hmm.
I was working with some young adults, and they were teaching me how to plant a particular, I think we're planting rice by hand. And I wasn't going fast enough. And my rice wasn't the right space together. And Rev, and so I started just kind of really slowly walking through how to do this, and fell into an African fertility dance that I had been taught in a dance studio. And I was like, oh my gosh, when you do this dance correctly, it allows you to plant evenly and quickly, and it's fun. It's like fun is sustainable. Mother Earth requires joyful encounter. And so that's a transformation. I fell out. I was no good the rest of the day when I realized that our ancestors, this is how they planted, and this is how they got a lot of work done because they had fun. They can go to revdele.com. REV is in victory, D is in David, ELE.com. You will see the Indigenous land management. You will see soil and souls. There will be links to the Indigenous Mothers Community Land Trust. We have a YouTube channel where we show the property and speak about the work that will be done there. So please reach out to me, rev@revdele.com. You can call me. I actually take phone calls. 804-389-5150. I'd be happy to talk to you.